Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 28th of May 2024. We are going to start with the breaking news video topic I talked about yesterday, which is the claim that the French are committing forces to Ukraine. I released that breaking news video, then I thought I'd better put some caveats on that. So I changed the title and pinned a comment to say, this is as of yet, formally unverified. The claim came from Commander-in-Chief General Syrskyi, right? And when that happens, you sit up and pay attention because it's coming from the leader of the Ukrainian armed forces. So what did he say? So he said that the French were going to commit troops to training inside Ukraine. Rebar here, the very pro-Russian source, said, amid the fuss of Syrskyi's statement, the French Defense Ministry clarified that the possibility of sending French instructors is still being worked on, and it's hard to argue with this. Right now, the French have been rehearsing their deployments to western Ukraine for weeks in Romania, just outside the Odessa region. For the French, putting troops in is a risky move that promises reputational damage and media condemnation, say the Russians. Therefore, the decision, which is disadvantageous for the French from any side, will be delayed to the limit and at least until the end of the Olympic Games 2024. Interesting point about the Olympic Games there, the politics involving that, and whether you'd want to cause an absolute ruckus before the Olympic Games with the security issues surrounding that is something worth considering. Shashank Joshi says, quoting Syrskyi himself, quote, I have already signed the documents that will allow the first French instructors to visit our training centres soon and get acquainted with their infrastructure and personnel. Of course, signing them to allow them to is somewhat different from saying they are definitely coming. They are allowed to come. We facilitated them being in position. A quote from the Kyiv Post, later on Monday, Ukraine walked back the announcement, according to AFP, Agence France Presse, saying that it was still in talks with Paris and other allies on the issue. Syrskyi is getting well ahead of himself, says Shashank Joshi. And this is a quote from the defense of Ukraine, so the Ukrainian MOD. Clarification regarding numerous requests from the mass media regarding the reception of instructors from partner countries. Starting from February 2024, Ukraine expressed interest in the prospect of receiving foreign instructors in Ukraine. As of now, we are still in discussions with France and other countries on this issue. The Ministry of Defence, together with the General Staff, started internal work on the relevant documents on the issue in order not to waste time on coordinating bureaucratic issues when the appropriate decision will be made. So it's still in discussion, according to the French army. As already mentioned several times, training on Ukrainian soil is one of the projects discussed since the conference on support for Ukraine convened by the President of the Republic. Like all the projects discussed on that occasion, this course continues to be the subject of work with the Ukrainians in particular to understand their precise needs. Okay, what's my take on this? My take on this is that it probably is happening. And so you wouldn't be the commander-in-chief and then just say something that was just completely factually incorrect and had no basis in truth. Something of that magnitude and to do with a topic like that, you just wouldn't say it. You could make up some argument that they're trying to force the French's hand. My idea is that he's got a good idea that the French are going to be committed to Ukraine, and he's let the cat out the bag, and the French, possibly with permission of the French, to kind of do a bit like what Russia do, which is, or any political party around the world does. You have, scare quotes, leaks. Leaks are very often not leaks, or they're not someone maliciously leaking something. They are purposeful leaks. So you release that through someone else to the press to see how it lands. And then you react to that and go, oh, that was unpopular. Yeah, no, maybe we won't do that. Or, okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, we'll formally follow that through. So this could well be one of those kind of leaks that the French have ratified. Or it could be Syrskyi going beyond what was seen as acceptable by the French and sort of cocking things up. or it could be everyone else misinterpreting what Sursky said, all these number of issues. But as I said, my take is that this is almost certainly happening, because you just wouldn't have someone like that saying things like that if there was no chance of this happening. And yeah, that's my tuppence on that. We'll have to wait to see how it plays out. I think this is a massively significant point of the war if it is indeed true. But then I do worry that of all the things happening this year, like the Olympics being in Paris is the most annoying. Like, the Paris Olympics is going to get in the way of France's ability to commit more equipment to Ukraine. So there's equipment that they would probably otherwise commit to Ukraine's defence, such as SAMP-T air defence systems, that they have to keep back to protect Paris. You've also got the political ramifications, the disinformation warfare that will be raging about it, the security threats, etc., etc. This is stuff that France could do without, and by extension, therefore, Ukraine could do without. It's just a really poorly timed moment here to have the Olympics in Paris, of all places. Nonetheless, it's happening. And so you have to factor that into some of the decisions that will be made by Macron and the French. Speaking of the French, someone amusingly said, because this is the ongoing joke with the French, right? Sadly, the French have a reputation of retreating. The idea that predominantly from the Second World War, they are scare quotes surrender monkeys and all these insults that we jokingly say against the French, particularly in the UK and the US, because people in the UK see themselves as like sort of we were the ones that won the World War II, and the Americans are like, we were the ones that won World War II because we came over and you would have been screwed, but we came over like knights in shining armor. Just on the UK front, like the UK, I've said this a number of times before, we have a distorted, because that's how people operate in their own countries. You get this rose-tinted idea of who you are, and you think you're much better than you really are. World War II was a great moment. There are very many great things that the UK did, and our armed forces certainly did. Battle of Britain being a key moment. You got to remember that we prevailed in World War II because we're an island. That's like the basic foundations to how the UK prevailed. If we were not an island, we would have been taken over with France. It was just, if we were attached to France, the German army would have kept going. So someone else quite rightly says here, they don't really. That is retreat all the time. They fought to an insane degree during World War One. It's a really good point. If you want to see All Quiet on the Western Front, understand that I watched that with my knowledge of learning history at school and thinking World War One was about the British in the trenches against the Germans. And in our education system, we don't take into account the fact that the French were in the trenches fighting against the Germans, and it was in France. It's almost like it's a British thing against the Germans. But the French, I mean, All Quiet on the Western Front is a really good, it gives you a great understanding of how horrific it was and how much it was the Germans against the French there. In that particular story, at least, they fought to an insane degree during World War One, was on the winning side of that conflict, and they stayed way too long in Indochina and Algeria. In other words, they didn't retreat when a retreat would have been both more prudent as well as more humane. The cheese-eating surrender monkeys meme, so that's the idea of the French, is mainly based on a twisted memory of World War II, where they were standing more or less alone, along with 13 British divisions who also retreated, Dunkirk anyone, against an opponent that it took most of the rest of the world 4 more years to finally defeat. So the idea that France were, the idea that many people in the US and UK have of France in the World War is kind of unfair, given where France were. Yeah, you can talk about Maginot Lines, you can talk about the politics and etc., but you had the Blitzkrieg of the Germans. You don't talk about that with Poland, with Czechoslovakia, with all these other nations that the Germans took over. And they would have continued into UK and probably would have done exactly the same to the UK as happened to France. And we wouldn't have been going, cheddar-eating surrender monkeys. Because, it's just, anyway, I think it's important to get an accurate sense of what really went on. And in my view, with that we're an island was one of the major components of our success in the Second World War, or Allied success. And that allowed us to, with the Battle of Britain, protecting the skies. And this was the start of air supremacy. Of course, our understanding of air supremacy leading to combined arms maneuvers, etc., 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 starts really with the Battle of Britain over the skies of the UK in 1940. And that came to be developed into suppression of enemy air defences, destruction of enemy air defence campaigns, etc., etc. Germany couldn't get air supremacy, and so they couldn't invade by sea the UK. That allowed the Americans to then come and set up base in the UK, and us to form a sizable enough force to attack on D-Day and do that counter-offensive, and there you go. But it was facilitated, it was founded on the UK being an island nation. So France was not an island nation, connected to all these other nations from which Germany could easily attack. And it's easy for us to sit back and go, oh, yeah, you're surrender monkeys. Well, we ran away. We effectively retreated. All you do is retreat. When we retreated back to our sanctuary island before we then got it together and attacked. And that's not to belittle any of what the UK did in those attacks, but just to understand the importance of geography. I think it's super important. Anyway, that's my tuppence over. That's me kind of standing up for the French there. But no, I'm not denigrating the British at all. Of course I'm not. I think there was incredible heroism from so many people. And that reminds me, it's Memorial Day yesterday in the US and possibly elsewhere. Just worth remembering those who have fallen in service for their country and hopefully for the right ideals when that has happened. Christian Amanpour from CNN says, what we see, she didn't say this. This is interviewing the Latvian president, Edgar Rinkovics. What we see is the consequence of our inability to provide Ukraine with weapons, he says, and also putting restrictions on using those weapons to strike military targets in Russia. So he is pleading for a change of policy in terms of the Ukraine is being able to hit Russian targets within Russian territory proper. The Dutch have said, so this is Defence Minister Kaja Ollongren saying the Dutch have never ruled out that Ukraine will have to strike inside Russian Federation. So again, this is another country doing it. This is growing momentum to support a change of restrictions from the Americans. It is quite clear that the Ukrainians have to strike inside Russia as well. So from my point of view, this should not be a matter of discussion. And I hope that other countries that have a different position will change it. In other words, the US there. There's lots of pressure being put on Biden and the administration to change things at the moment. And there are supposedly ongoing discussions concerning that. Now, NATO ministers will discuss the creation of a €100 billion fund, that's even more in dollars, for Ukraine, initially called NATO Mission. The package is likely to undergo rebranding to avoid a potentially misleading term mission, which can refer to an operation in Ukraine. There are going to be issues, no doubt, from our good friends Viktor Orban and Hungary. And in fact, we're going to come to that now. So the EU ministers are frustrated as Hungary blocks $7 billion of aid to Ukraine. Hungary's foreign minister reportedly received sharp criticism from his EU colleagues on May the 27th over Budapest stalling €6.5 billion, around $7.1 billion in military aid for Kyiv. Quote, tempers ran quite high, a diplomatic source told Reuters, which reported that according to many officials, quote, the exchanges were among the most heated in years among EU foreign ministers. Hungary are really, really, really becoming a problem. Not even becoming, they have been solidly a problem for some time, and it's just getting worse. OSINT Technical reports that today several EU countries are holding a major summit on speeding up ammunition procurement for Ukraine. That's to be held, or is being held, in Prague. Danish Prime Minister Frederiksen, Czech Prime Minister Fiala, Polish President Duda, Latvian Prime Minister Selina, and Dutch Prime Minister Rutte will attend. The group will talk on the Czech Munitions Initiative, the air defence of Ukraine, and defence industrial cooperation in Europe. Good stuff. Hopefully that brings about some much needed assistance to Ukraine. They are getting, though, quite a bit of assistance coming through. The Belgians agreed there was a bilateral security agreement today, and along with that, they've announced that they'll send 30 F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine within the next 4 years. So that's an ongoing process to 2028, but some will be delivered later this year, says the Belgian Foreign Ministry. It brings a number of F-16s pledged to Ukraine by Norway, Netherlands, Belgium and Denmark to 85 F-16 fighter jets. That's really good from just 4 countries. Really impressive. Now, Ukraine have said they need things like 120 to 130. So there's still a lot more to go. And of course, some of these are a long way off being delivered. What you need with that is the infrastructure in place for that many. You need the pilots trained, of course, for that many. And you need the maintenance crews as well. There's a lot to be considered in that. So it'd be interesting to see the trajectory of how many they start with and how many are added, how that goes in terms of continued support, and also whether there are other nations that are going to join in with that. What are the US going to do about F-16s? I'm sure they've got a fair few of these fighters that could be offloaded to Ukraine. Also, obviously, what munitions you get on board those airframes. Also, unfortunately, it will happen, but there will be losses of F-16s, both on the runways at the airfields, no doubt, as the Russians will be trying to strike as many airfields as possible, but also in the air. And be interesting to see what they'll need to replace, what kind of F-16 procurement they'll need in order to replace the attrited airframes. Belgium will also provide at least 977 million euros, so that's $1 billion in military support to Ukraine in 2024, the result of a signed bilateral security agreement, which is great. And that's quite a lot for the size of country that Belgium is. They are also obviously providing through the EU, and then you've got F-16s and all that kind of stuff. So good stuff from Belgium. They are certainly turning up to the party at the moment. Now, the Dutch, this is something I talked about previously about this should be happening, which is where a country says, right, I don't want to provide all of my Patriot capabilities here, but we've got maybe several Patriot batteries. We can provide 2 launchers, and then we'll put 2 launchers on order. It means we'll still have our ability to provide air defense for our country. It'll just be slightly affected rather than giving an entire battery. If we gave a whole battery and put a whole battery on order, we've then got an air defense hole that's really significant. But if we provide maybe 1 launcher, 2 launchers, or another country says, we'll provide a radar system because we've got another radar system that can just sort of cover that at the moment, and we'll put one on order, etc., etc. You get different countries to provide bits and pieces, then you get a whole Patriot battery that is not the burden on the shoulders of a single country. Now, the Dutch have been, in light of the German, unfortunately, they were unable to get their air defense initiative to supply the Patriots that they needed for Ukraine. They themselves, the Germans, provided 1 battery. But here now we have the Dutch saying, okay, in light of that, we will, with the assistance of other Patriot-owning countries who want to assemble and transfer the Patriot system to Ukraine in the near future, we want to do that. We can go about adding components to other people's offerings. So for this purpose, the Dutch will provide the main components from its own stocks and will ask European countries to add other components. German aid to Ukraine talks about this. So that's interesting. After the German initiative to strengthen the Ukrainian air defense did not give any new Patriot batteries apart from the German one, the Dutch are trying something different. They want to assemble from different countries. Serious talks are now being held with other countries about this. It's a great, although it's not a new idea. I mean, I've talked about it a number of times. Very simply explained, it will work in such a way that the Netherlands, for example, provides various launchers and the radar unit, while, say, the US supplies 100 missiles and additional launchers. Spain provides the ECS and so on. The idea behind this is the countries do not lose their entire Patriot capability, as is the case of the US and Germany, but only have to re-procure individual parts. Personally, I'd be interested in Germany's role in this regard. I can't imagine that we've already tried this as haven't already tried this as part of our IAAD initiative, or are working on it together with the Netherlands. After all, the Netherlands also had said no to Germany when it came to supplying a Patriot battery to Ukraine. So very interesting. Keep an eye on it. Good news there. Latvia is stepping up in its drone technology and production. They've given 20 million euros to Ukraine's drone army, while at the same time, the same amount is being invested in its own drone defenses. So quite often we are seeing nations get some benefit for their own security and defense of support for Ukraine. It's either motivating investing in their own defense industries or it's enabling, so investing in Ukrainian defense R&D and in manufacturing then allows that kind of knowledge, the experience from the Ukrainians to come back to influence manufacturing and R&D and manufacturing in your own country. And the end result being that assisting Ukraine is a way of improving your own defense infrastructure. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so here we have John Ridge from the Tochny team saying that per a video released by United 24 Media, it appears Ukraine has received AIM 9X sidewinders for employment to their US Norwegian NASAMS fire units. AIM 9X is the most recent version of sidewinder and confirms that Ukraine has received NASAMS 3 fire units. So this is basically some of the best, the best sidewinder they can be used air to air, here being used surface to air to take out Russian air defense threats and being sent from NASAMS units. Can 9X take out ballistic missiles? I don't know, but I remember talking about AIM 9X missiles previously. Let's look at the AIM 9X. We do Control F9X. Basically, this was the air-to-air missile. It's the AIM 9X. People were wondering whether the AIM 9s that we were seeing on lists of equipment going from the US to Ukraine were about air-to-air missiles. So missiles would be fired from an airframe to hit another airframe. And if they were 9X, then that would be really useful because they could be used in the NASAMS. And now that we do know that they are the AIM 9X, it means they are surface-to-air variants. But unfortunately, no mention of anti-ballistic missile capability there. So I think that's just for regular aerial targets. Anyway, let's go back to where we were, which is over here. Goodness me, we're some way through. Okay, so I talked about convicts being sent into or being recruited into the Ukrainian armed forces yesterday. And actually that number that I said yesterday, I think it was something like 300 something, or maybe just 300, has now gone up to 613 convicts have already been released and special assault units have been created for them. Minister of Justice also noted that the convicts will not be mixed with other military personnel, although this is not excluded in the future. Convicts are to serve in separate units of Ukrainian forces, the Justice Minister says. I find that interesting. I think there's arguments both for and against this, because I was wondering, what about the integration of convicts with non-convicts in regular armed services, and thinking, that could cause some cohesion issues. But then if you have units made up of like a sort of dirty dozen units of just entirely made up of convicts, then that could have issues to do with, I mean, it depends, because there's so many different types of people who get involved in breaking the law. If it's a white collar crime compared to, something like burglary, these are very different people. But throwing them all together, will units made up entirely of convicts make for a more challenging task in terms of adhering to rules and regulations? Or will it be good for them? And I don't know, will they get some kind of solidarity with each other? There will no doubt be some challenges no matter how you try and do these things. By the way, going back to this, the idea of French troops in Ukraine, this is really, really important point that someone made the other day that got me thinking quite a lot. It's great if Western and allied troops support Ukraine inside Ukraine. And I guess it's different training to like fighting on the front lines. But there must certainly be a bit of an issue if you have troops coming from other countries to support Ukraine when there are draft evaders from Ukraine who won't do it themselves. And that creates a really interesting tension there that I hadn't considered before. It's like, hang on, why am I coming to support your country if you won't even go and support your country? Imagine you're coming from France, right? And there are lots of Ukrainian men that have escaped to France to take refugee status in France. Say, we don't want to fight for our own self-preservation, so we're going to go to France and draw on like welfare, become refugees. And then you've got French troops going from France to Ukraine to support Ukraine. There's a weird dynamic going on there, and I do get that. That's a fascinating discussion to be having, like from a sort of philosophical and psychological point of view. I can imagine that could lead to some tensions there. That's certainly a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, we're now going to go to Russian matters here. A report from the Wall Street Journal has come out concerning Russia's Alabuga drone plant and how it is exploiting African workers. Now, we talked about this some time back. In fact, I can tell you when we talked about it back probably in July 2023, when Chris Owicki did a long thread. It might have even been August 2023 on this site. So the history of the Alabuga Shahed production or Shahed equivalent production plant is that the Russians want to be producing those drones indigenously in Russia. So they set up this plant, and then they've got this kind of sixth form college, if you like, in UK parlance, that is associated with the plant, where they get loads of young students to become effectively sweatshop workers in the drone factory. Then the drone factory was itself targeted by long distance drones. It's quite a long way away, so there's only several munitions that can reach that far. One of these, I think it was when we first saw these aeroplane drones, landed close to the dormitories in kind of this open area between two buildings, did limited damage to it, didn't actually hit the production facility, which would have been your primary target, I think. And there was lots of discussion about this plant because it's producing a number of these drones per week, per month, per year. And then at the same time, there was a lot of talk about it's not just students that are being co-opted into working there, but they're also appealing to particularly African women to come across. And there are a number of African women working there. We'll get onto the numbers soon. Chris Owicki talked about this, and now Wall Street Journal's released an article saying how Russia is recruiting young Ugandan women to make drones that kill Ukrainians. And an excerpt from the article here that you can read at your own leisure. If you pause the video, there you go. So they are not only using these young who are being made to work under pretty dodgy conditions, as you can see here. The facilities recruited young teenagers from African countries, said Chris Owicki back in July last year. Catfishing them via dating apps, Tinder and Badoo. Alabuga has focused on recruiting girls as African boys are regarded as, quote, too aggressive and dangerous. It consigns them to teenage slavery. A report published today has highlighted, so again back in July, that Iranian-designed Shahed kamikaze drones are now likely produced in Russia. The independent news outlets Protocol and RZVRT previously reported they were being assembled in Tatarstan. So that's this place here. Formerly a special economic zone called Alabuga, so on and so forth. All the details about that is in Chris Owicki's very, very good thread there, detailing the sort of people that are working there, the Africans that are led to work there as well. And then in August, he did parents from teenagers who are working there at the Alabuga Polytechnic in Tatarstan say their children are being exploited to work long hours building Shahed kamikaze drones, so on and so forth. And then another thread detailing the work conditions for both the teenagers and the African, predominantly women working there, or girls and women. The Wall Street Journal piece here says in synopsis that the Russian plant in Alabuga plans to produce 6,000 Shaheeds per year. By the end of April, the plant was ahead of the production schedule, having already delivered the promised 4,500 Shaheeds. At 6,000 Shaheeds a year, that one plant would be producing 115 a week. So if you're talking about the numbers of drones that the Russians are using and then would be able to use, then that is pretty frightening, because that's one manufacturing facility allowing just if you imagine on 6 days there are no Shaheeds, and then one day there's 115 of them all sent. And you're thinking, okay, that's just one facility. Now the ones that are actually still getting from Iran and maybe building them in other places, then this looks bad for Ukraine. At the end of April, and this, and then you're like, what, this has to be one of the main targets for the Ukrainians to hit, but they can only hit it with certain munitions. The end of April, it was building it built 4,500. Russian soldiers have learnt to operate the drones in Syria. Russia is now producing its own warheads to accelerate the production of combat-ready weapons. And the Kremlin has detailed photo reconnaissance of our positions, Ukrainian positions, and movements on the front lines thanks to the Albatross reconnaissance drones manufactured also at the Alabuga plant. And of course, they're getting satellite imagery from China, no doubt, as well. That is just not helping there. Now, talking about Iranian drones, well, this is one that has been supplied directly from Iran rather than building them themselves. Iran has supplied Russia with the latest guided aerial bombs, according to OSINT analyst Bild Röpke. The analyst came to this conclusion after analysing the video footage from the crash site of the Iranian Mohajer 6 heavy drone that crashed in the Kursk region. So I showed you that the other day in the Russian Federation last weekend. It was carrying Iranian Qam 5 guided bombs, which the Russian army had not previously used in its war with Ukraine. The drone was probably meant to attack the Sumy region of Ukraine, but failed to reach its target. According to Röpke, the use of such aerial bombs may speak of a new level of military cooperation between Tehran and Moscow. This is a real challenge to, when you're seeing guided bombs being released from drones that are being released from, oh my goodness, absolute nightmare, being released. These munitions being released by drones that are coming directly from Tehran is more example of this axis of evil existing between North Korea, Iran, and Russia, and you can add China into that. And what are we doing about that with regard to Iran? What are we doing with that with regard to North Korea, other than sitting back and shaking our fists at them, going, North Korea, I can't believe they're doing that. Meanwhile, nothing seems to happen in the UN. Nothing seems to happen in South Korea, actually, particularly, unless things are happening behind the scenes. Factory markings indicate that Russia has averaged production of at least 12 UMPB glide bombs per day over the past 2 months. This gives an annualized production volume of at least 4,400 rounds, which is likely to rise as Russia continues to scale capacity. This is a challenge because not only they're upping the manufacturing of drones, but also the glide bombs that are the scourge of the front line here. These are a real issue. Now, I don't know, these are slightly different from the Carb 500 bombs. These are smaller bits of kit, but again, they are producing these at if you add these together with all those other bombs, then they are just ramping up to problematic levels. Of course, Russia's pretty much on a full war footing. The question is always, what's their limit? How far can they push this? How many more bits of whatever kit it is can they produce per day? Are they operating at max? There are claims that some of their plants are operating, triple shifts at 24/7, and there isn't that much more capacity that they can get out of their already beleaguered nation. So it'd be interesting to know a few more details on what the estimated total capacity in terms of tanks and munitions and missiles and whatnot that they have. I've already showed you this video this morning, but again, we were talking about recruitment issues and whatnot. Here we have violence, abuse, prohibition, the use of the toilet, use of pepper spray, and the I Am Russian song blasting on repeat. This is how wounded Russian soldiers who refuse to go back to Ukraine to die in a special military operation are being disciplined in Yakutsk in Russia, cramped into small cells, 28 people in each one. They didn't protest against going to Ukraine to kill, loot, and torture in the first round. So it's interesting. There's a couple of points there. One, when we see these people, it's often they're protesting not the morality of the war itself. They just don't want to die, and their own conditions aren't good enough. That's really what they're protesting. And the situation is not good for the Russians. It shows that there is a low morale. It shows that they need to recruit as many people as possible, and they are going to all sorts of lengths to get people back to the front line or to the front line in the first place. They're going abroad, they're going to Africa, they're going to Nepal, India, Cuba, all these different places to get these soldiers. But the ones from Russia they do get that get injured, they can't get them back to the front line without sort of torturing them to capitulate and agree to go back to the front line. So it's not good news for the Russians in certain circumstances there. Anyway, that's enough from me for the time being. I need a damn big cup of tea. Take care, and I'll speak to you guys soon. Toodle pips.